The next speaker is Professor Philippe Ben Abdallah. He's research director at CNRS in France and adjunct professor at Sherbrooke University in Canada. He's head of the team of thermoplasmonic of Charles Fabry Laboratory at Institute of Optics at Paris. He got his PhD in applied physics, ENSMA, in 1997. And during the years between 1998 and 1999, he was a postdoctoral fellowship at Quebec University in Canada, where he worked on radiative heat transfer at mesoscopic scale in heterogeneous media. He held an alternative position at CNRS in 2000 and became a senior researcher at CNRS in 2008 at Nantes, where he led the group of heat transfer in materials. And since 2011, he's a CNRS senior researcher fellow at Charles Fabry-Perot Laboratory, where he's developed thermoplasmonic group.
So in this talk, I'm going to totally radically change the topic, since I'm going to talk about heat transfer and how we can try to make information treatment using heat source, and specifically here using thermal photon to make information treatment. So what I'm going to do is just to introduce you some basic concept which have been introduced during the last 10 days to make a thermal analog of classical building blocks that you have in electronics to make information treatment using thermal photon. Just to start, I just remind here it's a prehistoric, let's say a prehistoric slide where I just remind the basic building blocks in electronics, which has been developed a long time ago. And so the diode, transistor, memory, and logic gates. And what I'm going to do during this presentation is to show you that it is possible to make a similar device to control heat flux as we can control here electric current using thermal photon. Okay, so maybe I can say some word about this funny thing which are not so known here, about the first memory which has been developed by Williams and Kilburn in 1946, and which is basically a cathode ray tube. For young generation, you don't know, but in old television, you had such kind of cathode ray tube. And with that, by drawing a series of dots on the surface, on the screen of this cathode ray tube, on the screen of the television, then you can make a volatile memory. And the first logic gate also, which is not known, which has been developed, as far as I know, the first one was introduced by Tesla a long time ago. It was a system based on a radio wave remote controller, and the goal was to control a submarine. This is a submarine with an antenna here, and the idea was to use a system where you could have different operating frequency, and by acting on one part of the circuits, you could make the submarine turn to the right or to the left. So it was a logic gate. Okay, so, and as I say, the question we have tried to address during the last 10 years, is it possible to build, not 10 days, we are not so fast. It was to design a thermal analog of these elements. Okay, so my outline is the following. First, I very briefly remind important results in the field of radiative heat transfer, and specifically in near field regime, and when we have more than two bodies which are included in the systems. And then I will introduce the thermal counterpart of the system I discussed before, so the diode, thermal transistor, the thermal memory and logic gates. And I will finish in the last part by showing that it is possible to also control the manipulation of this photon using external field, and in particular magnetic field inside magneto-optical systems. Okay, so first, as you know, when you have two solids at two different temperatures, which are separated by a given gap, when this gap, the thickness of this gap is much larger than the thermal wavelengths, then they exchange heat through propagative photon. And as you know, which is the main result of the Planck and Kirchhoff theory, the upper bound, the maximum heat flux you can exchange between the two solids is given by the famous Stefan-Boltzmann's law, which simply states that the flux is bounded by the black body limits. So if you have two perfect absorbers, so two perfect black bodies, then you will get this upper bound, which is proportional to the difference of the temperature power 4. Okay, so but the situation radically changed when you reduce the distance at a separation distance which is smaller than the thermal wavelengths. In this case, what has been observed by Hargreave in 1969 with two samples of chromium samples. So here is the flux with respect to the separation distance. So at long separation distance compared to the thermal wavelengths, the flux is more or less constant. Okay, and below this limit, Hargreave and his collaborator has observed a huge increase of the flux, and he didn't really understand the origin of this increase. And the explanation has been brought by Polder and von Neuve 2 years after, and by developing the so-called fluctuational electrodynamic theory. And this increase is simply due, he explained that this increase is simply due to the tuning of non-propagative photon from one body to the other body. And thanks to this new channel of heat transfer, it is possible to go beyond and much beyond the black body limits that I mentioned before. And since then, a huge number of experiments have confirmed this possibility to go beyond this limit. So the interest of going beyond this black body limit is to have a huge magnetic, huge field flux which can be exchanged, and then you can have a drastic variation of the temperature in near field regime. So if we want to make a thermal analog of those of transistor, for instance, or memory, you need to use more than two bodies which interact together. So you need to go beyond the theory introduced by Polder and von Neuve. So it is what we and colleagues as well have developed during the last years and not the last days. By developing a theoretical framework, I'm not going to go into the detail here, but to see how a system made by several objects at different temperatures can interact in near field regime. So due to this interaction and this many body interaction, you have a specific effect that you cannot observe in two body system. And I'm not going to give the list here, but just to show you here an example. For instance, if you compare the heat flux exchange between two solids here and compare it with the heat flux exchange in a system made with two solids with an intermediate body and a distance between two successive bodies which are exactly the same as in the two-body system, then you can show, you can prove that it is possible for some separation distance and some thickness, of course, that you have an amplification of the flux thanks to many-body interaction, so due to a cooperative interaction in the system, which of course cannot happen in a two-body system. And with this effect, so these many-body effects, we have much more flexibility, and with this flexibility, we can give rise to new functionality, and this is what we have developed to show that it is possible to design this thermal analog of electric devices. So if you are interested to have more detail about this story, I invite you to read these two papers that we have published during the lockdown. So the first device, which is, by the way, made only with two bodies, so it is the simplest one, is the radiative thermal diode. So as in the electric counterpart, what we want to have in a thermal diode is to have a breaking of the symmetry in the system when you reverse the temperature gradient. So the analog of the BA voltage in these systems is the temperature gradient, and the analog of the current is the flux. So what you want to get to have a equivalent system is to break the symmetry when you reverse the temperature gradient. And this cannot be obtained if you have a simple material with optical properties which doesn't depend on the temperature. So the first condition is to have temperature-dependent properties. And the first prototype of this diode has been introduced by in the team of Chen Weifan, who has simply considered two samples of silicon carbide, but of two different kinds, one of 3C silicon carbide and one 6H silicon carbide. And if you look at the spectrum of heat flux exchange between these two bodies, when you, in the forward scenario, when the left body is hot and the right body is cold, and in the backward scenario, when it is the reverse, if you look at the spectrum here, you see that you have two different spectra, sorry, and this is related to the temperature dependence, which are different for the two different silicon carbide samples. And you can quantify the breaking of symmetry, the rectification effect, by simply calculating the difference of the flux divided by the maximum of the flux in both scenarios. And what has been shown with respect to the separation distance, so here you are at ambient temperature, you are in the far field, here in this region, and here you are in the near field. And they have shown that you can get more or less 40% of rectification with this system. So 40% is interesting, but it's a little bit far away from a perfect diode. And to go beyond this result, we have introduced a diode which is made with phase change material. And the material we have considered is a VO2 sample, so vanadium dioxide. And the property of this material is to have a phase transition between dielectric behavior at low temperature and a metallic behavior at high temperature. So, and the critical temperature is 340 Kelvin. So, which is interesting for practical application. So at this temperature, you have a phase transition which is of Mott type transition. And if you look at the electric resistance with respect to the temperature in this sample, you see that you have a drastic change of the resistance at around the critical temperature. So if we look at this system at long separation distance, and we, for instance, here I show you the reflection coefficient with respect to the frequency for both for the two phases of VO2. You see that the reflection coefficient is in blue correspond to the metallic behavior of VO2, so it's highly reflecting like a metal. And at a low temperature, it is a dielectric behavior, and then you see that you have a drastic change of the reflection coefficient. But we are not interested to work in far field, as I show you, because we want to go beyond the black body limits. And in near field, it is much more interesting to work with VO2 because VO2 supports a surface phonon polariton. So it's a resonant surface wave. And if you bring in front of VO2 silicon carbide, you are able to couple the surface wave supported by VO2 and the one supported by silica. And it is what I show you here on the what is called the transmission coefficient between the two bodies. It is simply the efficiency of coupling of different electromagnetic modes. So with respect to the frequency and with respect to the wave number, or the wave number and the frequency, sorry. And here the vertical line corresponds to the light line. So what is on the left of this line corresponds to the propagative mode, and what is on the right to the evanescent mode. So at low temperature, you see that you observe these branches which correspond to the surface mode I just talked about. And if you look the same transmission coefficient at temperature larger than this critical temperature, you see that these branches disappear just because in the metallic phase, the VO2 doesn't support anymore surface waves, and then you are able to switch off the coupling between the two systems. And thanks to that, you can drastically increase the rectification coefficient. And it is what we have shown in collaboration with a team of Pramod Reddy at Michigan University, with something which is quite similar to the previous example I show you, but for practical reason, it was a little bit different. The VO2 was deposited on aluminum sample, but it was more or less the same example. And what has been measured in this system is the radiative flux for different temperature gradients with respect to the separation distance. And you can see that the asymmetry in the system is broken, of course, because of all the stuff I just talking about. But you can see that at a distance of here it's around 150 nanometer. You can have a rectification coefficient. I think it's here. Okay, a rectification coefficient which is around 60%, but the temperature difference is much smaller than in the system I show you with developed by Shen Weifan, where the temperature difference was 300 K. So here it's just 70 degrees in the temperature difference, and then you can have a rectification coefficient which is already 60%. And if you go at 300 K, then it's not shown here, but you can trust me, the rectification coefficient become higher than 80%. So, and on this plot, you can see the spectrum for both scenarios. I show you the comparison with the black body spectrum here in black, and as I told you, you can see that the flux can be much higher than what we have in far field regime. Okay, I move now to the next. I think how many minutes I have now? I think I'm too long. Yeah? Okay, that's fine. So now I move to the memory. As I told you, in the William and Kilburn system, the idea was to draw on the screen of the cathode ray tube a distribution, a spatial distribution of dots. And what are these dots? These dots are simply a local variation of electric charge when electron beam impacts the surface of the screen, then you locally change the charge density, and then you have this local variation of the charge density. And of course, this variation only exists during a certain time. And if you associate the upper level of this charge density and the lower level to a 0 and 1, you can have a bit of information. But since the lifetime is finite, you have a volatile memory. And what we want to have in a thermal system, we want to generate thermal states. So thermal states, I mean a distribution of temperature, which are significantly different in two situations, at least to have two different thermal states that we can associate to a bit of information. So the simplest way to have this kind of behavior is to consider a system made by two membranes or two layers, made with once again, I use a silica layer and vanadium dioxide layer. And these two layers are able to interact in near field, as for the diode, by the way. But they can also interact with external thermal sources, which are here simply black bodies, but they could be something else and not necessarily a perfect absorber. And these two external sources have a temperature which is around the critical temperature of the VO2, so that the equilibrium temperature of a silica layer can be changed, can be modulated around the critical temperature of VO2. I don't know if it is clear, but you just work around the critical temperature about VO2, around of VO2. And so without going into the detail, if you look at, for instance, the evolution of the temperature of the silica layer, given different temperature, initial temperature, so you start with a given temperature in your system, and then you let it relax according to all surrounding heat source, you can see that the temperature in the silica layer evolves toward one temperature here, shown on this mapping toward this temperature, equilibrium temperature. And for the second layer, it evolves toward another temperature. And on blue, the blue dashed curve corresponds to the equilibrium temperature of the silica layer with respect to the temperature of the VO2 layer and with respect to the temperature of the silica layer. You have this line correspond at the end to the line in this mapping where the power received by this layer is exactly 0. You can do the same for the other layer, and you have this red curve here. So this curve corresponds to the local equilibrium of this layer, and the intersection between the two curves corresponds to the global thermal equilibrium of the system. And you can see that in this case, you have 3 intersections, and these 3 intersections correspond to different equilibrium temperatures that the system can reach. 2 of them are stable and 1 is unstable. So you can use these 2 stable temperatures as a 0 and 1, and you can use them as a bit of information at the end. So we can read and from one state and change the system, make the system evolve from one state to another state. It is what I show here on this curve. So for instance, if you start from the 0 state and then you heat up the VO2 layer using, for instance, a Peltier element, you can put a tiny amount of power inside the VO2 layer so that you make a perturbation in the system, and the system evolves naturally toward the second equilibrium state, which is here the states 1. And you can do the reverse evolve from the state 1 to 0 state just by extracting tiny power of energy, and you evolve toward the 0 states by following another trajectory, by the way, just because of the hysteresis behavior of VO2. And you can do that. What is interesting in this system is if you keep the external sources, the two black bodies I show you, without perturbation. I mean, if there is no perturbation in the temperature of the external black bodies, then you can maintain this state as long as you want. But if, of course, if you want to raise the memory, you can just perturbate the external sources, and then the equilibrium state is changed. Okay, so now I want just to introduce the third building blocks, which is the thermal transistor. So as in for its electronic counterpart, I use 3 body, as in the FET transistor, for instance. Here I have a 3-terminal system, which is made by one silica layer, which is the source, another silica layer, which is the drain, and between the two, between the source and the drain, I use once again VO2 layer, and I can tune the temperature of this layer to control the flux exchange between the source and the drain. And if we want to demonstrate that we can have a transistor effect, then we must be able to show that we can amplify the flux as in a transistor. So if we look here, the flux, for instance, if you look at the blue curve, which corresponds to the flux received by the drain when I change the temperature of the gate, then you can see that around a given temperature, you can observe a drastic change of this flux. And of course, as you know, it's obvious because you can have a temperature when the VO2 layer become metallic, and then you block totally the flux exchange between the source and the drain thanks to this phase transition. And it is what you can see here once again for the transmission coefficient, which is, as I told you, the efficiency of coupling between the source and the drain in this case for both phases. At low temperature, you have this bright line, which corresponds to a strong coupling between the source and the drain, thanks to the surface phonon polariton. And at high temperature, you suppress the coupling, and then the flux drastically decay. But this is not a transistor effect. To have this transistor effect, we must have the amplification. So the amplification coefficient is defined as the variation of the flux received by the drain with respect to the flux you put in the gate. You can rewrite this amplification coefficient in terms of thermal resistance, let's say, which are simply defined here in terms of the derivative of the flux received by the source on one case with respect to the variation of the temperature of the gate, and the flux lost by the drain with respect to the variation of temperature on the gate. Far away from the region where you have the phase transition, you can see that the flux lost by the source and the flux received by the drain have an opposite slope. And then, if you look at the amplification coefficient in this region, in these two regions, far away from this critical, from the region where you have the phase transition, the resistance, the thermal resistance are all positive. And in this case, the amplification coefficient can never be larger than 1. But if you look at what happened in the region where you have the transition, you have the same slope for the two variation of the flux. And in this case, according to the definition I showed you before, you had here a negative sign. And then because of that, it's possible to have a denominator which is smaller than 1. And then you can have an amplification coefficient which is larger than 1. And in this case, indeed, if you calculate the amplification coefficient, it is larger than 1 in the region where you have the phase transition. So, but this requires, in this case, a negative differential thermal resistance, and this negative resistance is simply related to the phase transition. Okay, with these building blocks, we can make now logical treatment of information, and we have designed several logic gates with using similar transistor or using many body system. And I'm not going to detail all of them, but I just want to focus on the end logic gate. So here, the gate is the following. We have a double gate transistor, but the two gates are in silica in this case, and it is the drain which is made with the phase transition material. And if we look at the temperature of the drain, when we change the temperature of the two gates, so you are able to change the two temperatures of the intermediate bodies, and you look at the variation of the temperature of the drain, you can see that you observe a drastic variation of this temperature around a given temperature, and which correspond to the region where you inject sufficiently energy in the drain to have this phase transition, and that's why you have drastic change of the temperature of the drain. And you can use the temperature of the two gates as the input temperature, as the input parameters. And if you make the truth table of this system, given as the input parameter the temperature of the gate, and as the output parameters the temperature of the drain, then you can show that in this region you have an AND gate. And if you are interested in the dynamic of this system, then you can let the system evolve. You solve the dynamic evolution of this system, and the result is shown here. This is the temperature evolution of the drain with respect to time. When you start from one state and you want to evolve to another state, and you can see, this is the important point I want to stress here, is that you can just make an evolution of the system at millisecond scale. So the important message I want to say here is this technology is not to replace the electronic devices. It's just to use thermal sources and to make some logical operation with that. At the end of my talk, I will give some potential solution to go much beyond this limit, but here, these samples are limited by this work at a millisecond scale, just because of the thermal inertia of the system. You must beat the thermal inertia, and this thermal inertia is fixed by the size of the system. Okay, now in this last part, I would like to move a little bit on another field, which is the control of the heat flux in near field using an external field. So I would like to demonstrate that we have been able to prove the existence of a thermal Hall effect in this many-body system using an external magnetic field. But what is surprising is that we can observe this Hall effect without any charge. We don't have any charge in the system. It's photon that we are manipulating. But as shown by Strom quite long time ago, now using a phononic crystal, let's say a crystal, not a phononic, a crystal. And when they have applied the temperature gradient in this kind of crystal using a transversal magnetic field, they have observed a transversal flux in this kind of crystal. But in this crystal, there is no free charge at all. So there is no reason why you should observe a transversal flux like in the classical Hall effect, because there is no free electron inside. But what has been shown a couple of years after by Mori and his collaborator is that in this system you can break the symmetry in the scattering function of phonon thanks to the presence of magnetic field. And we have shown that in many body systems we can have something quite similar. We can introduce a symmetry breaking thanks to the magnetic field also in many body systems. So to demonstrate this, we have considered a simple system which is made by 4 INSB nanoparticles. And to demonstrate the existence of this Hall effect, we just put these particles at the vertices of one regular square, okay? And we apply a temperature gradient between this particle and this particle, so particle 1 and 2, and let the 2 other particles equilibrate. And without external field, the INSB particles are isotropic. And then the dielectric permittivity is given, its dielectric permittivity tensor is diagonal as well. And you don't have anisotropy in the system, so that there is an exact symmetry between particle 3 and particle 4, and the temperature of the 2 particles are exactly the same, so that you don't have any flux, any transversal flux. So no Hall effect in this case. But the situation radically changes when you apply a transversal magnetic field, because in this case, the dielectric permittivity tensor takes this form, and the particles become anisotropic, and not only anisotropic, they become non-reciprocal, because you can see here the value are not the same out of the diagonal. And if we look at the temperature in this case of particles 3 and 4, they are different. We can quantify this Hall effect by measuring the what is called the temperature, the Hall temperature difference, simply the ratio between this gradient and this gradient, and it doesn't evolve monotonically, with respect to the magnetic field. So to understand a little bit more why we have this behavior, we have plotted here the resonance curve of all these particles with respect to the magnitude of magnetic field and with respect to the frequency here. And you can see 3 different branches here which correspond to surface mode supported by the particles. One is independent of the magnetic field, which is the one you have which exists even without external magnetic field. And if you apply a magnetic field, you have 2 new surface modes which depend on the magnitude of this magnetic field. And then you can see that if you change the magnitude of this external field, then you change the resonance frequency of this mode. And of course, if this resonance frequency are closer to the Wien frequency where the most of the energy is exchanged between the different bodies, then you can maximize the flux exchange transversally. So you can maximize the Hall effect. But if you, on the contrary, if you increase too much the magnetic field, then you have modes which are away from this what is called the Planck window, the spectral range where you have heat exchange. So this explains why we don't have a monotonic behavior. And more interesting is the topological behavior we have in this system. Here I just plot the fluid line around the Poynting vector around one particles when I applied a magnetic field. And you can see that far away from the particles here, far away from the particles, you have a radial, the flux is radial. But if you are in near field, so in this region, you can see a curl of the Poynting vector because of this, the optical property of INSB. And if you look at what happened in this four-body system, without magnetic field and with magnetic field, you can see that without magnetic field, you have a pure symmetry in the zero axis here between the top and the bottom. And here, on the contrary, when you apply magnetic field, you see that you have this curling around the particles counterclockwise in this case, and in this case, if you start with the two temperature which are the same at the origin for the top and bottom particles, then because of that, you can heat up much more these particles and then observe all flux in the transversal direction. This is what you can also see here on the spectrum of the power received by each particles. Without magnetic field, you have an exact symmetry in the system, so that the power received by the top particles, which is the blue line, and the bottom particles, the pink line, are exactly the same here. But in the case where you apply the magnetic field, you break the symmetry because of this curling, and you see that you don't have the same spectrum, and depending on the temperature you are working, then you can heat up much more the bottom particles than the top particles. How many minutes? 10 minutes, so I'm going to finish now. We have also shown that with this external magnetic field, we can generate a thermal analog of the giant magneto-resistance effect in this network of magneto-optical systems, where we can use the external magnetic field basically to increase or reduce the coupling between the two successive particles inside the networks. And for instance, here I show you the variation of the resistance along one chain of its INSB and silver particles with respect to the magnetic field. And you can see that we observe a decay of this resistance, which is very similar to what has been observed, by the way, with a totally different mechanism on the giant magneto-resistance effect shown with ferromagnetic materials, but with the same order of magnitude for the variation of the magnetic field, you can observe a similar variation of the resistance along the chain. You can also control the flux by using, by changing the orientation of this magnetic field. And well, I'm not going to detail this, but what is funny is we can demonstrate that we have an analog of a phase transition due to the change of the magnitude of magnetic field. Okay, so I come to my conclusion now. So I have introduced different building blocks which are thermal analog of the diode, the memory, transistor, and logic gate. And what we can expect to do with these devices, of course, the natural application of these systems is to make thermal management at nanoscale. So in far field, it's easy to change the direction of propagation and so on. But in near field, since you have only to handle coupling between evanescent mode, it's not so easy to change the direction of propagation, to store energy, and so on. So with this device, we have introduced some solution to do that. But I think more interesting is the potential of using these systems to develop sensors which are able to work without or with low power. The problem with sensor at the moment is you need battery. For instance, if you want to use a sensor for a detector against fire, when the battery doesn't work anymore, you cannot detect the fire. So using this, at least you could use the fire itself as a source of energy. But an interesting and potential application is to use dissipation of energy as external, as a source to develop communication technology and to make interaction between different machines, and in a long term to develop Internet of Things with it, but not with electricity. Just one thing I would like to say to conclude is, as I mentioned, in the system I discussed up to now, we are limited by the thermal inertia of the system, and then the operating speed of the system I have discussed are limited by typically the millisecond scale. But by using two-dimensional system, we could drastically reduce this speed, because, for instance, if you consider the heat capacity of graphene or another two-dimensional system, then in principle you could go to the microsecond scale, and even you could go beyond this scaling, but it's a long-term vision. If you want to work not at equilibrium, I mean, not in steady state regime, but you work far from equilibrium, then you can discriminate between the temperature of phonon and the temperature of electron, for instance. And then I think I have a sketch after. Let me show you this up. It was an example of a system which has been considered now 5 years ago. It was a system which was heat up with a laser, and if you look at the relaxation time of the system with respect to time, you can see that the temperature of electron in red and the temperature of phonon, so the lattices, are totally different during the first picosecond, and then after, of course, they are relaxed toward the same temperature. So if you are able to make this thermal management and to work at this scale, then in principle, you could first reduce drastically the thermal inertia, because if you work with the cloud of electrons, the inertia is very low, very weak, and you can, of course, increase drastically the operating speed. Okay, so with that, I thank all people who have contributed with on this work. And thank you once again.
Thanks a lot to Professor Philippe. Any question from the audience?
One question, a quick question.
In a second.
Philippe, thank you very much. You really push our imagination to a very off the comfort zone. I just wanted to ask you, you had phenomena that was susceptible to have a Tesla or a Tesla, but you also show some results that require 20 and 30 Teslas.
No, no.
So I just wondered, just to have an idea of the level of confinement that one would need for this, because I guess it affects a part of the electron part of the surface phonon polarity, right? The electronic charge.
Yeah, no. In fact, the example with this high intensity for the magnetic field is how can I say? simply a bullshit. But it's just a demonstration of proof of principle. But in fact, if you just use the appropriate material, it's a question of material. It's not only a question. In this case, it was a huge magnitude of magnetic field, but you can, as I shown for the giant magnetoresistance,
Yes.
it was with much less. Huh? Half it's quite, but it was the same for the beginning of the story for the GMR. Huh? But it was 500 millitesla. The first paper they have published on that, it was with 500 millitesla. Huh? So.
Any other question from the audience? I have a question regarding the effectiveness of your end gate. What is your threshold?
The effectiveness
of the end gate. What is the threshold you are using?
The threshold.
Yeah, is for example when you have a delta T over the ground. What is your definition of good zero and your because
okay.
never will be a real zero or never will be a real one, but
yeah,
you need a threshold. And
yeah, exactly. You are right. That's why it's important to have a clear variation in the region where we have where we define the 0 and 1. So so I don't have the number in mind, but as far as I remember, so here, so you can see the value. It's not so clear, but I think here it was around 338 Kelvin. And so between the 0 and 1, you have a change, the variation of the temperature, which is around here. No, not 2. I can hear you. It's around 10 degrees or something like that between here and here. 10. But the variation is if you cut here the mapping, you will see that the variation is very sharp. Mm-hmm. So there is no real problem. So if your question is what is the uncertainty between the 0 and 1 in this region?
Well, it's more the effectiveness is is T1 minus T2 divided by the ground. It will be delta voltage divided by the ground voltage in the end gate.
Okay, I'm not sure I catch exactly what you mean, but we can discuss after if you want. Because the ground, for me, you mean the temperature outside? Or?
No, to compare with the electronic end gate.
Ah, okay.
In this case, I think you have a definition of ground in temperature. Then you will have the T1 and T2. Then T1 and T2 will be defined the delta voltage, and the ground will be the comparison.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I didn't make any comparison with directly with that.
Okay. Here, other question.
So, not an expert in the field, but I have a question. How robust are all these against thermal perturbations?
Which system you are talking about? All system?
In general. So I am not, yeah, in general.
In these systems where we use this phase transition, at the end, they are quite robust with temperature perturbation. Since there are two important things. You must be able to have a transition between one state where you have a strong coupling between surface wave, let's say, more or less, and another situation where you have not this coupling because of the transition toward the metallic behavior. And so this is the first important thing. And the second thing is you must operate in the region where you have this phase transition. Apart this, if you have fluctuation of a few degrees around the operating temperature, it works.
Okay, thanks again we're here, the last one. Yeah. No, we have time.
Okay. Actually, I have maybe two questions, short ones. The first one is about maybe the technical aspect. So how do you prepare these experiments where you like bring together two elements in a submicron kind of distance and ensure that you only have like radiative heat and not some other channels that.
Okay.
So it's not the, it's not some like your two hands that you bring together. So it's a nanofabrication.
Okay. And the
and then the second one was more about a curiosity that you showed the first paper in the late 90s that there was like this increase in the heat transfer, and then after 30 years there was a boom of papers again. So why it was again interesting?
So the second question first. So why is a lot of people has considered this problem about near field? So it's not only for making information treatment. It was first to since I show you that you are able to have a huge heat transfer in near field because you have a huge energy density which is confined to the surface of a hot body, and people have tried to extract this energy using thermophotovoltaic devices. So by bringing close to the surface PN junction, working in the infrared, and then they try to extract this energy to convert it into electricity. So that was one of the first motivation. But also some people on the Virgo experiment have considered this problem because it was important to insulate the system from external perturbation. And since they were working for some part in near field regime, they have also to consider this, but it was not the main motivation. But the main one is this one, and also people who have tried to work on heat-assisted magnetic recording using a hot body. Yeah, they try to locally change the magnetic states and using this near-field heat exchange. So that was a second motivation. And the first question was, sorry.
That's from a technical perspective. How do you like? Because we didn't see any real like.
For the measurement in
how do they look like?
First, I'm not an experimentalist, so but I'm going to try to give you an answer. The people work in vacuum first, just to avoid the convection and the difficulty is to maintain the parallelism also between the two solids. So the first experiment has not been done in plane configuration, but with a tip above the surface. And then you have no problem of orientation in this case. So they have first demonstrated this effect, not in plane, but in a tip plane configuration. And then what else? It works, and they can use a piezoelectric system to control the separation distance. Also, by making interferometric measurement in the gap, just to see that you have the good separation distance. There are a lot of solutions, but it works.
But were there not also some experiments that relied on the Casimir force?
Yeah, there are, but a lot of people in this community move in the near field community because it's much simpler to make a measurement in near field heat transfer than to make a measurement of the Casimir force. But yeah, there are some measurement about the Casimir force also.
And the last one.
It's another curiosity. So because I come from the 2D, two-dimensional community. So what are the more promising materials beyond graphene for this sort of effect?
I'm really interested in one material. as a theoretician, so maybe I can say something totally crazy, but there is one which could be very useful for the development of this technology. It's a 2D decalcogénure, because it should be the equivalent to the VO2, but being able to have a phase transition, but using a 2D material. I know that some people work on that at San Diego, I think. But my problem is at the moment, I don't know, I don't have any data about the optical properties of this material in the infrared. So if people could characterize the optical properties of this material, it would be nice, because we could make a step forward in the scaling problem, time scaling problem. So it's one of the material, but probably.
You don't need it to be polar optical to have surface quantum polarities, or not?
It's not necessary to have surface. You can have only evanescent waves. When you have surface quantum polarity, it's resonant mode, but you could also work with surface evanescent wave. It's probably less efficient, but you can.
Okay, thanks again to Professor Philippe.
Thank you.